Welcome to Propaganda Loves You, the show that asks and answers the question, what is a fiscal conservative, and do they still exist? I'm Kodie, your host for this episode, joined by Arthur and Joe.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
We shall fight on the beaches. We shall fight on the landing grounds.
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
Welcome back to Propaganda Loves You. This is our Thursday episode this week. What we wanted to talk about this week actually is take a little bit of a step back from some of the deep dives on like specific disinformation or propaganda or talking about ongoing conflicts or anything like that, and talk just a little bit more in general, open conversation about American political parties and kind of like what those perceived values, I guess, versus like actual, and just in general, like what our thoughts are on different political parties or political journey. So I kind of wanted to talk through, I guess, how my views on different political parties have changed over the years, and then get your guys' thoughts and tell me where I'm wrong. And if you guys feel like talking about that as well, you're more than welcome to. But yeah, before we get started, anything that you guys would like to say kind of before we start talking about different political parties and whatnot here?
My initial thought is just a framing, something that might be useful to keep track of as we talk. The difference between a political identity and a political party. An identity being a perspective an individual can have, and a party being an institution that purports to represent a certain perspective. So just remembering that parties are institutions and political identities are kind of a lot more flexible or whatever.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point to make. Okay. With that in mind, I'll kind of start with just, my background or I guess where I started. So like I never really, I don't think I really had a political thought or consideration of political parties for a very, very long time growing up. It really wasn't something that we like talked about a lot in my household, just in general. Like my parents weren't like huge Republicans or huge Democrats or anything like that. It just, we didn't really talk about politics or political parties. And, when that topic came up, I remember I had an uncle that liked to talk about politics a lot, very Republican. My aunt would just be like, no, like we don't talk about politics. Like that's just the rule. And so like for the longest time, that's really kind of like how it felt growing up, even with Bush and the Iraq war and how crazy political our like looking back, those times actually were, especially like, with going into Iraq, I guess was the big thing, and just Bush in general and the craziness that he had. Well, and going a little bit before that, just his election, right? And the Al Gore in 2000, like, probably won that election, I think, and was handed the election by the Supreme Court at the time. So anyway, all that to say, like I didn't really have much of a political identity or party. I thought that I was probably a conservative, a Republican, mainly just because I think that was kind of just the prevailing attitude, I think, at the time after 9/11, like with Bush had like a 90% approval rating or something crazy, and everyone was kind of rallying around the flag, and it felt like that was just the norm, I think. And I don't think I really started thinking about politics much at all until early into my Marine Corps career. Like Obama had just been elected. I didn't vote in that election. I think that was probably the first election that I could have voted in, was like 2008. And then honestly, until we got to where Trump started campaigning, right? Like it was, I think I realized like Obama, the Democratic Party, had more espoused beliefs that aligned with what I was thinking, as far as just like, hey, like, social equality being one of the things that they had talked about or whatnot. Like I really didn't feel like I understood or could get behind a lot of the more cruel aspects of I guess the Republican Party, when you really look at their different policies and the way that they talk and treat people on welfare, and the whole like, all of that just seemed like unnecessarily cruel, or unnecessarily like not understanding of other people. And so like that's what initially kind of pushed me towards the Democratic Party. I think Obama had probably had a lot to do with that. But even like 2012 between like Romney and Obama, I don't think I had like super strong. I wasn't like out campaigning for Obama or anything. Like it was like, and I think if Romney had won, I probably wouldn't have been like, oh no, like the world is falling apart or anything like that. That's the level of detachment that I really had from the day to day, because none of it really affected me that much. I had a job that was, secure at the time. Like I wasn't in trouble. Most of my family wasn't really affected by what was going on at the national level politics that much. And then I think once Trump started campaigning and whatnot, that pushed me much further towards the Democratic Party just because of Trump himself. That's really what kind of started me paying attention to politics in general. And it was just because I always felt like first, at that point, I'd been in the military for a little over 8 years, and you see what good leadership does versus bad leadership. I've worked under people that I would say are both. And so thinking about Trump being the overall leader of our government at the time, like it was just clear that he had absolutely no idea how government actually worked. And, he was a very chaotic person in general, right? Like multiple businesses and got bankrupt, and he just lied constantly to your face. Didn't matter. The narcissism, right? The constant woe is me, and always like I'm the best at the same time, like always playing the victim while also projecting like you're this strong man. It just was ridiculous, and it was such a clash of ideals. I think is really what it was. The value that he places on things like wealth. It always seemed clear to me that there was a class issue here. Like he's clearly preferred the wealthy, has a disdain for anybody else, but would lie to your face just to get people to vote for him. I'm not saying that I was super thrilled about like Hillary Clinton. I was not. Obviously, like 2016, I was hoping that Bernie would be the candidate. I think 2016 was the first time I ever donated to a political campaign, and that was Bernie. Same thing in 2020. Bernie was the one I was donating to before he got forced out during the South Carolina sweep. But anyway, Trump represents all the things that always kind of embarrassed me about America, like just the loud, obnoxious American that's always right, that's like, like just in your face very much, like that always. Yeah, it was always embarrassing to me when I think about America and think about how people outside of the U.S. think about America. That was probably the biggest thing that pushed me towards more of the Democratic Party. And then, more recently, since the 2024 election, did do not campaigning for Harris, but did like the postcards for Harris to try and get her elected in 2024. Since that election, I think having paid more attention to the Democratic politics during that, and then looking back on 2012 and 2016 and like what they did to keep Bernie out, I was trying to understand how 2024 could happen, I guess. And that made me reflect more and look backwards on how can a political party that is going up against a 30-time convicted felon that tried to overthrow the U.S. government on his way out the door during the last election, how can you lose to that? It was the question that I had to ask myself a bit. I think that made me more reflective on the Democratic Party writ large. I think this podcast and talking to both of you has made me see more as far as like, as long as you have the same donors, you really don't have any different end state. Like, I mean, maybe socially there's a different end state there, but like as far as the machine, you're both powering the same machine, you're both being paid by the same machine. And as long as that's the case, like, yeah, you're not going to see substantive change because the machine's not going to let that happen, right? Like and I think that is one of the conclusions that I came to from the 2024 election was like, as soon as the Biden/Harris campaign started talking about, oh, we should have a capital gains tax, we should start doing these things that would go more against corporate interest, like money poured in for Trump and like the support that he had as well. Like, so I guess that also was kind of like an inflection or splitting point to be more on the line of what Bernie has been talking about for years, what AOC's been talking about. I think I do believe I do believe in the Democratic process, and I think the ideals that American politics talks about, but not the actual on the ground truth of what we've seen, right? And so, yeah, that's pushed me more towards like the democratic socialist side, just because I feel like democratic socialists, this isn't a blanket rule, but the ones that have pretty high prominence in national politics, I feel like they genuinely want to help people. And that's really, I think, what I try to look for in any candidate that I'd want to support is like, are they genuine in their belief that they want to help people? Like, policies can always change, but if someone actually cares about the people that they're representing, that's like the baseline for me in order to support somebody. But yeah, that's the short version of my political journey that's taken me from what I thought I was a Christian conservative, when I was like 15, to probably a democratic socialist is the most likely thing that describes my inner political identity and how I feel. And I don't think there's a party out there that actually represents that, at least not one that has any national prominence in the U.S. There's the wing of the Progressive Party for the Democrats that is probably the most closely aligned, but realistically, I don't think that there's not a strong party anyway that represents how I currently feel and how I currently think my identity is. So that was a lot of rambling there, but yeah, just wanted to talk through that and get any thoughts from you guys. Like, did you have similar experience or very different? Like, did you always know where you were, I guess was my question.
Yeah, I think that growing up, I grew up in a Catholic religious household, and I used to think American politics was like, basically like two teams, fighting. And you kind of chose a team, not unlike baseball, where, of course, as a kid, my favorite team was the one that won, the Yankees. And I had actually no idea who they were or anything like that. And the religious and the political aspects both kind of showed, they both try to instill a authority to institutions and to obedience and to kind of letting the status quo run the world. And I think you can start to see in school, you're taught these checks and balances and separation of powers, and you make an icon out of the president because it is like that father figure myth that we've talked a lot about. And Congress is kind of slow and, fractured and secondary. Then it's like you also kind of view the Constitution like, oh, it's this perfect document. No, actually, there were a lot of compromises that we've talked a lot about in a lot of these episodes around how it's actually skewed for corporate and elite interests. And I think that, along with Citizens United, I think was a huge moment in my political upbringing where my politics really shifted left. And I totally agree with you. Like, there's no political party that actually is trying to help. It's like they each are fighting for the center, like median voter, and they just keep shifting that just slightly enough each election cycle so that they can win and they can maintain power. And in reality, the Republicans are serving the wealthy and they're more like upfront about it. And Democrats do the exact same thing, but they have better speeches and they pretend to maybe, care about blah, blah, blah. But really, they're serving the corporate interest too. And you can see the revolving door of like lobbyists and how they become, like political people become lobbyists. And it's just grotesque. So yeah, my journey, like, I think kind of like what you're saying too, it's more about like unlearning these value systems that we're actually inculcated with. And I still vote, put energy into that. But I think that, like, for me, like, the political journey is learning that politics isn't just about electoral politics. Like, there's politics that exist outside of that.
Please stay tuned for a word from our sponsors. Are you tired of getting lost? Worse, tired of being told what to do by a passive, indecisive voice that can't even hold a direct line? It's time to take control of your journey.
My old GPS is so cowardly. It had me drive through 2 neighborhoods just to avoid a temporary bike lane.
Problem is your GPS is weak. It lacks conviction. Straight Shot would have simply told you, go straight.
That's right. Our proprietary, unwavering line algorithm doesn't care about paved roads or fragile crops. It delivers a clear path to your destination, whether that's the nearest hardware store or the Patriot Strength Party rally on the other side of town.
Go straight.
man, that just feels right. It's like it's not just giving me directions, it's giving me a mission.
A mission of purpose, a path of unyielding clarity. Straight Shot isn't just about the destination, it's about the conviction to never veer from your chosen course.
Download Straight Shot today. Your journey to a more decisive future starts now.
Straight Shot. Never veer, never yield.
Straight Shot app is not responsible for any collisions resulting from an unwavering commitment to the instructed path. I resonate a lot with the things that both of you guys have said. Yeah, similar to you, Kodie, I didn't have a lot of political education growing up, just in the household. I got the standard stuff in public school. I think the main lesson I remember, one of my social studies teachers, when we learned about political parties, he was like, well, one day you wake up, you decide you're a Democrat. That's okay, you can be a Democrat. Tomorrow you wake up, you decide you're a Republican. Well, that's okay, you can be a Republican. And that was like our lesson on political parties. I was like, oh, two options. Okay, cool, whatever. But I think as far as political identity goes, for most of my childhood, probably not until 18, 19 years old, I felt like I just wasn't involved in the political world at all. Was vaguely aware that people cared a lot about politics, that people were really worked up about Bush. I remember seeing a lot of adults in middle school and high school with very strong opinions about Bush and everything. And I just felt like an outsider to all of that. I didn't feel like identified with it in any meaningful way. At the same time, I was going through a whole religious transformation. I grew up Southern Baptist and Pentecostal, these sort of really intense evangelical traditions. And all of that kind of unraveled in my head when I was in high school, and I went through this phase with like deism and all kinds of stuff, and went through a very angry atheist phase in my early 20s. Now I'm basically a practicing Buddhist for all intents and purposes. All of that kind of happens alongside a parallel political journey where I become increasingly aware of how politics is really a conversation about power on a social level. Communities just don't pop up out of nowhere. Governments don't just pop up out of nowhere. They're created for certain purposes with certain people's interests in mind. And I started getting more and more interested in that. When I was in the Marine Corps, I did 5 years. So from ages 18 to 23, basically, when I was in the Marine Corps, most of that I was on a 24-hour watch floor as my job. So there was a job to do, but there was a lot of downtime to just sort of watch the news and browse the internet and stuff. And so I did a lot of like self-education during that time, just looking up different things. I listened to all of Rage Against the Machine's discography just like on repeat during this phase. So that's sort of like the vibe and the background. But at the same time, I became a vegetarian during that period because I learned about factory farming. I watched a documentary called Earthlings, which, trigger warning if you've never watched Earthlings, that's a very intense experience. But if you're interested in the truths about factory farming, it's one place to start. At the same time, similar to you, Kodie, because I think maybe you're a year older than me, but we had the same sort of opportunities to vote growing up. I remember being in training during the Obama election and also didn't vote because I didn't take care of the absentee ballot or whatever. And I was just kind of like, I don't really know anyway, so whatever, who cares? But then 2012, by the time that came around, I saw the Tea Party happen in the first midterms of Obama's first term. And so I started getting more and more interested. Okay, well, what are my politics? What are the politicians I care about? And I don't know, it's always been a feeling since childhood for me with regard to Democrats and Republicans that I've never trusted either one of those parties. Like I've never really had a good feeling about either one of those parties. And so 2012, I voted for Jill Stein in Maryland. I started to learn about the Electoral College during this period because all of the Green Party's efforts in that election were just exposure. Try to get as much attention as possible. Obviously, you're not going to win the presidential election if you're a Green Party candidate, but you can get some attention. I remember Jill Stein and her vice presidential candidate of that, I can't remember her VP's name at the moment, but it was an indigenous woman. They tried to force their way into a presidential debate that was happening in 2012. And they were blocked out of it, and they like tried to force the issue in front of the building where the debate was happening. They wound up getting arrested. And I remember that being kind of like, oh, I'm just now starting to form my political identities, and they won't even let the candidate that I like into the building to have a conversation. And that just being like a real big moment for me, like just why are only these two parties allowed to be part of the conversation? How come we can't have other people even join the conversation? You know?
Mm-hmm.
And so that had a big effect on me. I learned about the Electoral College. And for all my presidential votes, it's really depended on where I lived. So it's been like 2012, 2016, 2020, and 2024. It was Maryland, Virginia, and Maryland. And so my votes were Jill Stein, Joe Biden in Virginia, and then Jill Stein again in Maryland. Because Electoral College wise, like the Virginia vote was the only one that mattered, right? Trying to make sure Joe Biden didn't lose in Virginia in 2020. You're welcome.
Yeah.
That was the only time I voted for a Democrat for president. So all that to say is like, for me, it's like, I don't think it was like, oh, I started out one place on the spectrum and over time moved in another direction. For me, it was like I was a complete outsider. And incrementally, I'm getting a little bit closer to feeling like I understand the system that the spectrum describes. And the more I understand about it, the more I confirm for myself that I'm pretty far left on that spectrum. I believe people should take care of each other, like empathy is a basic human value, and that any conversation about politics should be used to address real suffering in the world. And for me, that always ends up looking like mutual aid, looking like socialism, looking like communism on a very communal level. We haven't gotten into the new book yet, but there's some useful conversations already, I think, in the first two chapters about like small scale communism and what that looks like. And it's basically just mutual aid on a neighborhood level. And so that's where my political values are. That's a lot of rambling for me, but just, I don't know, I was kind of inspired by the stories you guys were telling about your journey. So I like these conversations.
I think that's interesting that you had an outside in kind of venture versus my venture was like, thinking I belong to certain groups and then just finding out along the way that I don't really think I belong to those groups, like versus feeling like you don't belong to any group and then trying to find that, that right group. I guess the other thing I kind of wanted to talk about was just the reason for getting drawn to different parties and whatnot. Like, I think, I originally thought I was probably a conservative, I guess, what was the mantra? Well, it was,
Don't think,
like I mentioned
don't
before.
think, just vote.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like, I think you hear fiscal conservative, right? You hear people talk about that. They talk about value of hard work, value of individualism. And so like when you talk about these at a high level, I guess at a very basic level, I still don't see anything wrong with some of the espoused beliefs, right? Like, I don't think there's anything wrong with hard work. I think like having hard work as a core value of a person, like being willing to do a lot of work is actually a really great attribute for people to have, right? But where that gets twisted, or where I think that gets twisted, is it's the inverse of that. Like, well, you are automatically lazy if you have any type of entitlement or any type of welfare, right? So I guess it's more about the inverse of the arguments than it is about the initial arguments themselves. Because let's just use fiscal conservatism as an example, right? I would agree with the principle that, we shouldn't be spending more money than we have, right? And we should make sure that we're judicious in how we spend money, right? And we should not tax people as much as possible so that they can retain and spend their money however they want to, right? Like, in principle, I understand that, and I think it makes sense. But when you look at the actual in practice of those that claim to be fiscally conservative, they've never, at least in my lifetime, had a balanced budget or lowered the deficit. It's always been more. Like, so it's just like, I don't know how like that through line continues. Like, some people still bring that up as like a reason to support conservatives. And in my lifetime, they have never been fiscally conservative in any way. It's just been about cutting funding for people that aren't them is kind of like how that's actually been used. So anyway, yeah. So my point there is that, are there any like of the stories that like, as the stories or narratives of different political parties that as you kind of like explored more, you're like, find out like, oh, that's just PR. That's bullshit. Like, they don't actually like believe in that sort of thing. Cause I could name the same thing for probably some democratic beliefs, but
Absolutely. Anyway. Yeah. I think it's an important question to ask ourselves with any time that we find ourselves included in a group or included in an identity and no one asked our consent or permission to be in that group. Like, we were just told that we were a Christian growing up. We were just told that we were a Republican or a Democrat or whatever growing up. those identities that you didn't consent to explicitly, it's important to question those and really step back and be like, wait a minute, do I agree with this identity? Do I belong to it? Does it actually represent what I want to see in the world? And I think the way the religious identity can unravel, the same thing can be true with the politics, because there's some just taken for granted belief at the core of it, that the authority figure at the center of that identity has your best interests at heart. And if you do some critique of that location, if that's a person or an institution or whatever, and you realize, oh, they actually don't have my best interests at heart, then you have to question all the messages they've been giving you, like pull yourself up by your bootstraps and all this stuff. Because hard work sounds great, it sounds like a good quality. I immediately want to say, how are we defining work? What counts as work?
Right.
Is it only when you get paid for it? Because there's a lot of work that needs to be done that nobody's going to pay you to do. I think the capitalists tend to monopolize the definition of work in a way that allows a lot of other things to be seen as not legitimate. So, like my mom, before she passed, she was part of her church community in a really big way, and she would organize with the local Little Caesars pizza place where they have a ton of pizzas left over at the end of every shift because of their hot and ready policy. Like they always have a $5 pizza hot and ready. And so when they would close, they would have all these like 10 or 15 pizzas just to throw out at the end of the day. And she had organized it with some of her church people where they would go pick up the pizzas at the end of the day and go run around the neighborhood and give them to families who were poor and couldn't afford groceries or whatever. That's work that needs to be done, and nobody paid her to do that. And so that's what I mean, like what counts as work.
Yeah, because if it's just you have to be plugged into the economy, you got to be that little human battery that goes and produces for the economy, right? Like that's the only version of work where that is valued, right? Making more value for the economy and making and that's what I mean. Like I completely agree, Joe. Like at that high level of just like we'll be conservative with our money or we'll be whatever, that can sound good, but in practice or like how it's actually executed or I guess demonstrated values versus espoused values, right? like that's the one you need to pay attention to for each of the parties. Like what's the actual demonstrated values that they have based off of what they've been doing, right? And does that line up? A lot of the times doesn't seem like it.
Trying to remember if it was a Joe Biden line or not. I think it was something Joe Biden used to say, maybe in the 2020 election cycle, where it was like, he attributed to his dad or something. Like, my daddy always said, you show me your budget, I'll show you what your values are, or whatever. And I thought it was one of those like random pithy little things that actually hits and is kind of true, despite who the messenger is. But yeah, I mean, you talk about these federal level conservatives espousing fiscal conservatism. Maybe Ron Paul is the only, in our lifetime, the only Republican politician who's kind of practiced what he preached in that sense. But most of them are just, they'll give tax breaks to their buddies. They'll give handouts to private prison corporations and industrial farming and all this stuff. But when it comes to welfare or housing or things like that, oh, no, we don't have any money. We can't help people. No, that's a waste. You got to work hard for that. You got to earn that. No.
Tired of division? Exhausted by the talking points? Introducing Bipartisan Party Lines, the revolutionary private club designed to bring Americans together. No matter which side of the table you're on, we've got a reason to meet in the middle.
I've never partied with a snowflake before, but once we got talking, the energy was undeniable.
I know, I was so hesitant, but once I found that pure, uncut connection, it turns out all that other stuff just fades away.
That's right. Bipartisan Party Lines is where real connections happen. Uncensored, unfiltered, and always buzzing with activity. We're cutting through the noise and getting straight to the source of what connects us.
I've never felt so clear-headed. The ideas just keep coming.
This is so much better than drawing a line in the sand.
So if you're looking for common ground, you know where to score. Bipartisan Party Lines. Don't just be on the same page, be on the same line. What I'd like to do then is just really quickly, like, What are the political parties that we have here in the U.S. that have any kind of real power? I mean, it's the Democrats and the Republicans are pretty much the only ones that are going to get elected at federal level. Or we do have independents, right? Like Maine and Bernie Sanders from Vermont's technically an independent, though he caucuses with the Democrats, right? And you've got other political parties in the U.S., like regional powered political parties mostly, right?
Like the Working Families Party started as a Northeastern thing, and now they've got chapters in, I think, California and Oregon and some places in the Midwest.
So I guess what I would say is like something that would be interesting for anyone that's listening, whenever you have local elections, especially for like town and county and stuff like that, there's like all sorts of parties that are endorsing people on there. And that's like all the, like I just mentioned, the Working Families Party. But like, yeah, I think like in here in the Adirondacks, I can't remember the name of some of the other ones, but there were some pretty funny ones up there, but like hyper local, like, like maybe this is a party like in this county and that's it. Do you guys see that, like where you are? Is that like something similar? And I'm wondering if the value there is like going and like, I don't know, learning about those specific parties and maybe joining. I don't know. What are your thoughts on like actually joining a party and like working on trying to change a party from the insider and actually participating in the party system? Any thoughts there?
I think there's actually been a pretty interesting. I was following David Miscavige. Is that how you say it? David Miscavige. He was.
One
I
of
don't
the
know.
Parkland
Yeah,
student?
yeah.
Yeah.
And he became like his own political right, and he actually ran for a vice chairman or president position within the Democratic Party, and they're already trying to boot him and saying like it wasn't a fair thing because he tied with somebody else, and it's like two people get and they're trying to like kick him out. And he sort of leftist because he said, "Oh, I want to unseat all these centrist Democrats and all these old Democrats." I saw the same thing in the Democratic Party when Bernie in 2016 was at the convention, and who is the head of the Democratic Party? It was actually the Clintons' best friend, this guy whose name I don't remember, but Hillary put him in charge. And who does he pick, of course, and who does he support but Hillary? And it's just like the game of the political parties is just disgusting. And I think like working in like locally, we have, like DSA aligned independent are great, and like working family parties, and of course like the Greens and Libertarians, like there's a lot of different amalgams of these parties that take place. And I think working on one of those like smaller, more regional, community oriented ones like the DSA or working family stuff is could be really great. I think that you have a lot more power in those like micro kind of communities, and that's probably how elections should be.
Yeah, like if you have a good, strong chapter of the DSA in your area and grow it to where it's actually got political force, then also I think like at that point, you still have opportunities to influence national politics by endorsing, right? Like if you have a very strong DSA chapter and the Democrats are running either a centrist, like corporatist type character or someone that's actually more progressive, and if the DSA doesn't have a candidate or there's no way to win, doing endorsements for those candidates that most closely align, even if they might not be in the same political party. I know like the Forward Party does that. That was like the Andrew Yang one that they started after he dropped out of like the 2016 election or whatnot. But yeah, I think there's definitely value there. And that was David Hogg you were talking about, right?
Oh, was it? I don't know. Okay.
Miscavige is the Scientology.
Oh my God, totally. Where is his wife? We'll deep dive next episode. We haven't seen her in 3 years.
Yeah.
Wait, is that the guy that Tom Cruise salutes at the conventions?
Oh, that's so embarrassing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh my God. So sorry to the real David and comparing him to that guy.
I mean, I'm fine talking shit on Trump, Putin, and Netanyahu, but I'm a little nervous about Scientology.
Yeah, they have real like underground networks. They could, I don't know.
Scary people. No, I agree with the local strategy for sure. Like your county council, your city council, your local representative, school board, your state house, even your congressional representative, you have some real influence over those things going on. I think the federal election, like the presidential election, I kind of always view as rigged in one way or another in terms of how I've said before on the podcast. Like we're nowhere close to a meaningful democracy at the federal level of 50% of the population approving of the government in power, like not even close to that. So regardless of how the numbers shake out, Trump got 75 million votes. Kamala may have gotten a few more votes than he did, or a few less. They're still nowhere close to a meaningful Democratic representation of the federal power. So yeah, use whatever parties are available to you in your local area to make some real influence in your area. If there's a Democratic candidate who's doing good work, support him. If there's, a Working Families Party person, do that. In the DMV, the DC, Maryland, Virginia area, the Washington, D.C. chapter of DSA is really active in supporting local council elections. They have an elaborate questionnaire where aspiring candidates can apply for a DSA endorsement. They have to fill out a questionnaire, and based on how they respond to the questionnaire, they'll get invited to a DSA meeting, and they'll get to speak to the local chapter and explain why they want the chapter's endorsement. The candidates who do get the chapter's endorsement get a lot of canvassing support, which is really what matters in a local election. It's like they get the DSA chapters, volunteers basically will go knock on doors for those candidates and tell voters about them and pass out pamphlets and try to, really support them in the election. So you do get some infrastructure from using those local chapters, whichever ones make sense for you. But I know DSA as a strategy has chapters all over the country that are really doing meaningful work in that area. Just getting local city councilors who are DSA approved and have good policies and stuff. Meaningful positions of power. Think local with the politics. I think that's a good strategy. I would like to see candidates leaning less on the rhetoric of parties to make their messages. Talk about the substance of the laws that you're going to try to enact. Talk about the actual things you're going to do for your people. Don't say vote for me because I'm a Democrat and the Democrats like you or whatever. I don't care about the parties. I care about what is your specific plan once you get in office. What are you actually going to do with the power you get? And look at it that way.
Yeah, I agree. I would vote for, if I thought that, if a Republican candidate came out and I thought that they were genuine and they really cared about like protecting people and like doing the right thing, it doesn't matter what the moniker is before the person's name in my mind. It's like with the person and what are they doing, right? I mean, sure, that's a little harder to say these days, but I still think that's true, right? Like I think there could be another evolution for the Republican Party where they're like, oh, this is just going to lead us directly into X, or maybe there's people that have left the Republican Party in the last 10 years that see the resurgence of their idealistic version of it, right? Like, I don't care, as long as they actually care about people. But Joe, to your point too, it almost tied into like what we talked about last week when we were talking about community, right? Like it ties into that local community. And if you're involved, I'm just going to keep using DSA as an example, but like if you have a DSA chapter in your town and you're like that chapter is involved in local politics, it makes these groups that are easy to kind of other at the national level much harder to other if they're the ones that are helping your town every single day, right? Like, and I think that does, like you said, like if you focus on community, focus on your local politics, it can have that impact on the national level if it's spread, right? Like if a lot of people are doing that across the US and making, Democratic Socialists or, Green Party or whoever less scary to everybody in your town and more realistic of what they're actually trying to do. I think, yeah, definitely agree with you. That's impact for sure.
The other thing, like I guess kind of tying to like, what political parties exist in a lateral thinking kind of way is that political action committees or PACs are unelected power blocks that have much more stability because like, presidential elections come and go and Congress flips, but Chamber of Commerce or the Koch network or whatever, they're there forever and they influence and they don't have to win any votes. And I read that the spending of both political parties, Democrat and Republican, was around like 2.5 or $6 billion in total in the last election cycle, the 2024 one, and that all PACs totaled over 15 billion. So it's like,
Jesus.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. And it's kind of like a Putin strategy where it's like, you see all these people come and go, but you just maintain power forever. And then you can actually just have that steady hand. It's not very laissez-faire. It's like, let's have the corporate interests keep going.
It was the second to last season of House of Cards. Like, I don't know if you saw that, but Frank's like, I'm the president, but that's not where the power is.
Yeah.
Like,
I want the money.
yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah, I was just thinking back about like what I don't know. It's easy to get demoralized about national level politics, just feeling like, oh, presidential vote doesn't matter. It's kind of rigged. It's really depressing. And so, like, I've heard other people online who are communists who will say, people will ask them, what's the point? You say you're a communist, you say this stuff is rigged, but yet you vote. Why do you vote? What does it matter? Why do you even participate in these elections or whatever? And I think it's important to remember how valuable all the conversations we have with people are around election time. Regardless of whether it's a legitimate democracy or not, there are going to be a lot of conversations going on about politics every election cycle. And so it's important to remember that the conversations we have are part of that political process. I'm not going to get enough people to vote for the Green Party for us to have a Green Party president next time, but I'm going to talk about it and hopefully slightly change a few more minds about it and get people more curious about third parties and the conversation a little bit more towards what can we actually do about it. The conversations themselves are part of the political process. When we say, oh, I'm not a political person, or I don't really do politics, stuff like that, you can't avoid politics unless you're a hermit who has no contact with anyone. Relationships with other human beings are inherently political. There's some distribution of power going on, there's some distribution of resources going on. The way we have those conversations is all about politics. So yeah, I remember earlier in the conversation, I think you were mentioning your uncle and how your aunt was like, oh, we don't talk about politics, right? That's in the culture, right? If you're at work, you don't talk about politics or religion. Like, who does that serve? Who does that serve that like, you're not allowed to talk about these things, right? It's like the boss saying, don't share with your coworkers how much you make. Don't share your hourly rate. That's confidential. Why? Who is that good for? Let's talk about it. You make more than me? Why? You got hired after me. That doesn't make sense. Have those conversations. Talk about it.
Yeah, it's because like that's one of the few times where it's like totally acceptable or more acceptable and more when people would be like interested in probably learning more about this too. Because there's a lot of people that don't. I mean, they check out of politics like most of every, I don't know, 4 years. Like the people that just vote in the presidential election every 4 years, right? And they not interested in it otherwise. I mean, yeah, granted, that's a lot harder these days just because it's in everything. But yeah, I completely agree, Joe. I think like when you have that opportunity to give people more clarity, again, like to call back to our conversation last week, right? Like it doesn't need to be trying to, bring somebody into your exact point of view, but making sure that they at least have the information that you have and like why you decide the way that you do, right? Like then they can take that into account too.
Yeah, and the inverse is true too. It's like, I don't know, whenever I learn something new, I try to like really appreciate that moment, when my perspective gets shifted by something somebody else said. And I'm like, if I notice any resistance to it, first of all, it's like, wait, why am I resisting that? That kind of sounded true. Why am I resisting that? And, take other people's ideas seriously. It's scary to step out of your own perspective, but like that's the only way any of us learn anything is just taking that leap to entertain another perspective for a minute and see what happens. So yeah, I think using our own learning experiences as examples to inspire other people to step out of their comfortable perspectives. I think that's an important part of it for me. As a teacher, that's what I'm always trying to, that's where I feel like I get my credibility as a teacher, in the fact that I have meaningful learning experiences that I can talk about, ways that I've learned to change my perspective. Not because I have certain degrees or whatever, but because as a learner, I have experiences about what it's like to learn something. That's where the credibility comes from.
That totally makes sense.
I really loved listening to you guys about this whole framework and perspective. My only wrap-up thought was like, yeah, I guess when engaging in the conversation, like it sounds like both of y'all are open to different perspectives, and that is what actually allowed for you to shape your own perspective. And I think that's like the most important thing. And I think it's like, when we were talking about these moral claims of like party lines, like Republicans with individualism or hard work, it's like just dispelling that. Like if you can just take somebody's viewpoint and be like, well, is that the moral value? Because if hard work equals success, don't you think all of my teachers growing up would be rich, and like these people with 3 jobs would be rich, and like you're telling people to get over like systemic and class and racial issues just by like pushing through. And yeah, I think that overall it's just been like just getting moral clarity on politics and what's really happening. And I don't know, just how you both have gotten there. It's just been really interesting hearing that. And I really loved hearing, Kodie, how like you go from like at, base, maybe you're conservative, but maybe you're not. Joe, you're an outsider, and then me, it's like, I'm a Democrat, maybe I'm not. So it's really interesting that we've had these varied viewpoints in discussion, and how we've all ended up with like, well, we really value economic justice and we hate these systems of exploitation. And it's like, yeah, I think most people, if they were given these kind of frameworks and can dispel that kind of stuff, that's what most people would want, is fairness and equality in the world. So it's just been really nice hearing all, your journeys.
I'm just thinking like what keeps that from happening is I don't want to, like, if I say it's the propaganda, it's like saying the name of the show, but it's true.
It's almost
it's
like,
just like
propaganda loves you. Yeah, it's like in the TV show, you got to say the name of the episode every few times.
Propaganda loves you like a leech, basically. It's like, it's not a healthy kind of love. You got to step back and question that attachment. It loves you. You don't have to love it back.
Yeah, I think my very last thought, Joe, just to close up, I lost it again. I had it. It was gone. I got it back. I lost it. Damn, I hate that when my brain doesn't work like that.
Something about killing the rich.
Yeah, that's what it.
I don't want to kill the rich. I just want to take away all their money. Limit it, cap it.
Yeah.
Cap the
Yeah,
rich.
I mean, however billion, you said cap the rich?
Yeah, it's like it's a pun. It's going to be my new bumper sticker.
That's so funny. Yeah, billionaires should not exist. They can give away their money for other things.
I'm going to have to be very careful about how I edit this one. All right. Awesome. Well, I don't have any plugs or anything this week. I think other than, go check out your local political organizations. If you're in the Adirondacks, I talk about Adirondack Voters for Change a lot, but that's not like just a democratic or independent institution. It's more about organizing around ideas and beliefs than it is about a specific political party. Look for others in your area if you're interested in learning. Where do you sit? Try and dispel inculcated values versus actual values, or values that you came up with versus values that were placed on you. I think, Joe, is what you were kind of saying there earlier.
The consent idea. Yeah. Consent to your political identities.
Yep. That's what stuck out to me. Don't just accept that you're, a conservative Christian just because, I guess, or just a Democrat just because that's what your parents were, right? Like, try and find that for yourself, I guess, would be my only plug for this week.
My plug is a book club. We got book club coming up. We're reading The Dawn of Everything. It is a surprisingly difficult thing to read out loud, I am discovering, but I'm working my way through some of these strange words and names that I'm trying not to butcher. There's a lot of random French and a lot of random, indigenous names that I'm stumbling over, but it makes the reading experience funny for me anyway. If you're interested in the book club, pick up The Dawn of Everything, start reading, join us for these conversations. I think they're going to be really enlightening and fun and interesting, and probably not what you would get from most other podcasts right now. So
yeah, good call. We're planning on releasing that first episode on Thursday the 21st is our intent. That'll be the first 2 chapters, I think, is what we're planning, but we reserve the right to change that depending on how far we get when we record. All right. Well, that's it for this week. So, stay safe, and propaganda loves you. That's it for this week's episode. Thanks so much for listening and hanging out with us.
If you enjoy the show, help us spread the word. Leave a rating or review and share it with your friends, family, or anyone you think would get something out of these conversations.
Your ratings, reviews, and shares help this show grow, and the more people listening, the harder it is for propaganda to win.
So until next time,
stay aware, stay safe, and remember,
propaganda loves you.